I am Professor Arvind Kumar Jha from School of Education, IGNOU. Friends, today we are going to talk on behaviorism and its educational implications. See, before I talk about behaviorism, let me talk about education. What is education? I mean, it's very difficult to define what education is. But presently, I am going to confine what education is in terms of learning. So, education is a learning, and in that context, as far as the behavioristic understanding is concerned, we can say learning is education. Friends, human beings are bestowed with different qualities like intelligence, reasoning, thinking, problem solving, etc., etc. And they are educated through formal, non-formal and informal agencies, you all know. So, the process of educating human beings has been changing due to the influence of different psychological learning theories. Now, what do you mean by psychological learning theories? Psychological learning theories explain the process of educating human beings, the factors that affect learning environments and learning outcomes. So, and also the factors that promote learning in educational settings. Hence, we can say that the understanding different psychological theories is essential for teachers and educators as well as the students for helping their learners and helping themselves in different contexts. So, it is very important that we should acquaint ourselves with the concept of education and psychological theories, particularly the behaviorism. Why? Because people say that, one of the schools of thought, as a psychological school of thought that has really influenced all over the world, and that is behaviorism. Now, as far as the behaviorism is concerned, behaviorism believes in the behavioral changes only then learning takes place. And one of the champions of this, who is also known as a theorist who gave the idea of classical conditioning, Ivan Pavlov. He was a Russian psychologist and he was the proponent of, as I said, classical conditioning theory of learning. And you should feel very proud that people say that in his study, of course, he did a study on dog and he noticed that the dog was not only salivating at the sight of food, but also at the sight of ball and the experimenter and the sound. So earlier what Pavlov did, Pavlov was of the opinion that it was because of this psychological secretion, but later on he realized that the psychological reasons were the causes of these secretions. So it was not only physical secretion. Sometimes when you look at, suppose someone, your favorite sweets, what happens? You find that there is a secretion in your mouth. So people say, oh, it could be only the biological and physiological secretion. But Pavlov is of the opinion that it is also a kind of psychological secretion. So we can conclude that he shifted his view on the phenomenon of dogs' salivation from physiological to psychological process. Pavlov also used some of the terms. As a student of education, friends, you must know. For example, unconditioned stimulus, US. Conditioned responses, UR. Similarly, conditioned stimulus, CS. And conditioned response, CR. And all these things you must understand to explain the phenomenon of salivation in his experiment. So, salivation in response to food placed in the mouth is a natural response, and thus it is called unconditioned response. Fine, friends? So, food was the unconditioned stimulus as it elicited the saliva, which was unconditioned response. So, when Pavlov rang the bell continuously followed by food, it led the dog to salivate. So, the bell alone acted as the conditioned stimulus, whereas the saliva was the conditioned response. So, the model of classical conditioning can be explained in terms of unconditioned stimulus, for example, food, gives responses to unconditioned responses, for example, saliva. Conditioned stimulus, sound and bell, and combined with unconditioned stimulus, that is a food, it will give the birth to unconditioned response, that is a saliva. Similarly, conditioned stimulus, sound of bell, will give you the response of conditioned response, saliva. Now, as far as the classical conditioning is concerned, which we are talking about, it can be defined as a sequential process in which a neutral stimulus combined with a natural stimulus acquires all the characteristics of natural stimulus, and therefore it is called sometimes as stimulus substitution, friends. So, what is its implication? Higher order conditioning is another type of conditioning which is presented, and you must have read in SLM, right, which I do not want to repeat. So, in short, what I would like to say that the Pavlov was of the view that individuals' capacity to learn depends on the type of the nervous system and practice of the activity under reinforcement. And this is one of the educational implications that we can decipher for the time being. So, for any learning to occur, because we are discussing behaviorism just to understand how learning occurs, how learning takes place, or what a teacher should do so that learning should take place maximally. So, for any learning to occur, drive plays an important role and it motivates one for action. Okay? So, we can say that some of the important implications of theory of classical conditioning can be used in educational situations. It can be, and more importantly, it can be used in training situations, right? So, children, or you can say students, must be rewarded for their good deeds such as cleanliness, respect for elders and punctuality. If you do not reward, maybe tomorrow he or she would not be motivated enough to do that. Children's wrong actions, or sometimes people call it bad habits, can be reduced by providing appropriate conditioning. The third educational important, which is very important, is the principles of classical conditioning help the students as well as the children with poor mental health to overcome their emotional fears through love, affection and good treatment. And it can be used to develop positive attitude towards learning, towards teachers, towards elders, towards seniors, and consequently they will break all the negative attitudes. Last but not the least, friends, the principle of classical conditioning is used by teachers in classroom teaching for language learning and even subjects like mathematics. I remember, like you, when I was doing my Bachelor of Education, I was supposed to develop some learning materials on the basis of principle of instructions, and that we people of program learning, you must be knowing this, or you will come to know slowly in the field of mathematics. Well, now I will be talking about the another great mind, and he is none other than B.F. Skinner, and he was a professor at Harvard University, right? He came out with a different theory, and this theory is known as operant conditioning theory. That's the part of the behaviorism, right? And he conducted his experiment, not dog as Pavlov did, but on rats and pigeons, and he developed his own apparatus. That was the beauty, to analyze the behavior of rats and pigeons. He recognized two types of conditioning in his experiment, which are respondent conditioning and operant conditioning, right? So, in operant, but I'll be talking more about operant conditioning. In operant conditioning, reinforced stimulus is paired with, as Pavlov did, neutral stimulus and acquires properties of natural stimulus, which is also known as respondent conditioning. So, when a response occurs spontaneously in the absence of any stimuli, it is known as operant conditioning. So, this response of organism is instrumental in receiving the reward, so it is also called instrumental conditioning. Now let us try to understand with an example of operant conditioning. In this process of operant conditioning, as defined by Skinner, there are two kinds of reinforcement. One is called positive reinforcement and another is negative reinforcement. So it was evident that when the subject, for example, maybe a child, maybe a student, any human child or human student, gets a positive reinforcement, for example, appreciation for good work, praise for good things, that will result with an active performance and a negative reinforcement. Suppose you all the time you blame your child, which is an example of negative reinforcement, that will result with avoiding in participating activities. Suppose if you ask me to do something I know I am not good at, but still it is expected on the part of the fellow human beings to encourage, maybe not today, maybe tomorrow, after a lot of practice I will be able to do better work. So instead of blaming the child, blaming the human being, blaming the human civilization, it is better to appreciate and praise, and that will not only help others, right, to modify his or her behavior, but that will help you also to become a man or a woman of positive behavior. So appreciation and praise is a very good thing. Otherwise also you should do, friends. Now, what is the difference between classical conditioning and operant conditioning? Very naturally this question might be coming to you. Some of the points I would like to discuss with you, friends, that in classical conditioning, stimulus is given first, then the subject elicits the response. In operant conditioning, the subject does not respond first and then the subject receives stimulus. So the bond between stimulus and response is weak in classical conditioning in comparison to operant conditioning. So learning occurs both types of conditioning. It's not that learning occurs only in operant conditioning and not in classical conditioning. No, learning occurs both types of conditioning. But in the education process, both types of conditionings have importance and applications for the purpose of teaching and learning, friends. So the theory of operant conditioning has important implications for human learning and classroom teaching learning practices. So if theory of operant conditioning is appropriately used by teachers in the classroom or otherwise also by these elders in the at-home affairs, it will facilitate students to learn and the children to learn in a better way at home or in the playground, in the market or anywhere. The operant conditioning can be used for shaping the behavior of the child with the help of both positive and negative reinforcements. Positive reinforcement strengthens the desirable behavior and negative reinforcement eliminates the reoccurrence of undesirable behavior. And as I mentioned that when I was doing my Bachelor of Education program, I did develop one study material and teaching material on the basis of programmed learning, right? So programmed learning is the greatest contribution of Skinner, friends, and it is used to strengthen student learning. I remember that for just to understand what is a set, you ask any guy or any student and student will say, oh, a set is a collection of well-defined objects, no? Or any Pythagoras theorem or any De Moivre's theorem. But to understand this phenomena, I was supposed to write 20 pages question answer materials. It used to be considered the huge. So programmed learning is what? I'll take 1 or 2 minutes. Programmed learning is individualized and systematic instructional strategy for teaching different school subjects. As I give you the example of mathematics, no, it can be used to teach Hindi or English as a language. It can be used for teaching science subjects, physics, chemistry, biology. It is effective even to teach, right, the social science subjects, history, geography, civics, etc., etc. Why? Because it helps students in self-learning at their own pace in a joyful way. At this age, even if some presentation goes on, so I request, please share your PPT. And then people say, oh sir, why do you need this? And I say, because I would like to understand this on my own pace. For example, here I don't know what's your pace of learning, but still I'm sharing with you. But the best advantage is that you can listen to me or my video as many times as you want, which is not possible in a physical classroom. It reinforces child to proceed to next level if the responses are correct. It helps a teacher to cater to the needs of the students individually. So friends, Skinner has emphasized the utility of programmed learning in improving the vocabulary of students and the acquisition of learning. I remember when I was a student of graduation, almost there was a book on antonyms and synonyms, and I learned the entire book. But I didn't realize, because that time I was not a student of education, that had I tried to learn it using program learning instruction methodology, I would have learned in a shorter time in a better way. So in program learning, words are presented to students in a logical order, right? Okay, so let's discuss the comparison between classical and operant conditioning. Classical conditioning, it was, as you know, by this time you must have come to know, it was developed by Ivan Pavlov. On the other hand, who created operant conditioning? B.F. Skinner. Similarly, classical conditioning is also called Pavlovian or type 1 learning. So similarly, you can phrase your you can frame your phrase. If I ask you, how would you like to name operant conditioning? And without hesitation, you will say, oh, it is also called Skinnerian or type 2 learning. Okay. And if I'll ask, okay, in terms of on whom experiment was conducted, you will say, yeah, in classical conditioning, Pavlov did experimented on dogs, and in operant conditioning, Skinner did it on rats and pigeons. Okay? But there is another difference as far as learning is concerned. In classical conditioning, learning is a passive, okay? But in operant conditioning, learner actively participate in order to be rewarded or punished. You know, if you say, okay, you do this, I'll give you some sweets. See how enthusiastic children do the things, isn't it? So, I mean, it's not only in teaching, learning, in day-to-day life also we use this. Similarly, in classical conditioning, the association between a stimulus and a response is due to law of contiguity, friends. What do you mean by law of contiguity? Law of contiguity means sequential occurrence of proximity of stimulus and response. Now, I'll talk about the association between stimulus and response in operant conditioning, what it happens. Within behaviorism, two kind of law of contiguity and law of effect. What is the law of effect? Law of effect, what happens here? Response producing satisfying effect likely to occur again, and responses producing discomforting effect becomes less likely to occur. Right? Okay. Now, in classical conditioning, it is controlled by autonomous nervous system, but in operant conditioning, it is controlled by central nervous system. I am not saying, B.F. Skinner has said this. If you are interested, read about B.F. Skinner more and more. In classical conditioning, reinforcement is provided before the response is made, but in operant conditioning, friends, reinforcement comes after the response is made. Like yesterday when I was talking about something with assistant professors, different parts of the country, I didn't give them the answer. I said, first you do and then I'll reinforce you. No? So, every time in your life, you use such techniques consciously or unconsciously, friends. So, it is now classical conditioning, it is concerned with single stimulus response bond, or you can say single stimulus response bondage. But in operant conditioning, it is concerned with chain of responses, because if you do 3 times good, 4 times good, then only I'll say, oh, very good, well done, keep it up. No? So it is a concern with chain of responses to get the desired goal. Okay? In classical conditioning, there is a pairing of, as I said earlier, if you can recall effectively, unconditioned stimulus and conditioned stimulus. But in operant conditioning, there is a no pairing, friends. There is a no pairing of unconditioned stimulus and conditioned stimuli, right? Similarly, in classical conditioning, it has zero strength to begin with as it is classically conditioned. But in operant conditioning, it does not have zero strength because it has to occur at least once before. No? Now, related to this, I would like in short talk about the self concept. Suppose before I talk about self concept, I'll give you an example. I know I'm not good at football playing or particularly making a plenty shootout. What should I do? But I want to be a passionate football player. What should I do? Usual answer will be, sir, you should practice a lot. Absolutely right. You said very correctly that I should practice a lot. But do you think that that's all? No. Until and unless I believe in myself and my self-concept to myself is positive enough, I'm positive about my self-concept, only practice will not help me. So the idea of self-concept explains about our beliefs and knowledge about ourselves. Now in this case, in the example of football case, I will have to believe in myself that yes, if I practice, I'll be able to kick a penalty shootout in the best way. I'll give you another example. There are the three great players whom I admire in the football. Neymar, Messi, okay, and Ronaldo, Cristiano Ronaldo. In terms of penalty shootout, if you'll ask me to identify who is the best footballer, Messi is the greatest, but no, not in terms of penalty shootout. My first choice will be the Neymar because he hardly misses that. The second will be whom? He will be none other than Cristiano Ronaldo. And you can recall, if you are a football fan, that Messi once resigned even. And Messi said, no, I'm not going to play football again because he had missed the penalty shootout in one of the crucial matches. So what I would like to suggest, yes, classical conditioning, concept of operant conditioning, concept of the practice, all these things will help you to grow. But the best will be, first you'll have to believe in yourself. Yes, I can do this. So friends, what is the self-concept? Self-concept means how do I perceive myself? Self-concept explains about our beliefs and knowledge about ourselves. So it is generally thought of as an individual perception of our behavior, our abilities and unique characteristics. What is it that, if you believe in God, what is it that God has given you so uniquely? Do practice that. You must have read something about John Milton. When he realized that he's a potential writer, but by that time he became blind. So it is always better being a student. Always try to find out what is it that God has given you so uniquely. So friends, for example, a person's beliefs such as he or she is a good friend or he or she is a kind person are part of an overall self-concept of the person. So basically, self-concept is influenced by our sense of identity. I'll 2-3 people I'll quote what they have done. For example, I'm a big fan of Carl Rogers, right? When he wrote something on self-concept way back in 1950-51, and he defined it, self is an organized configuration of self-perception. See how beautiful is this definition. Self is an organized configuration of self-perception about an actual or idealized self of which the individual is aware. Similarly, almost after 35 years, Hamchek, and he defined self-concept is a person's total view of himself or herself. And I believe, friends, that most of the success that you receive in your life Yes, practice does play a role. Your dedication and devotion, all these things play a role, but it is your own self-concept. Always believe in yourself, because it is the total view of yourself. Similarly, even Burns have written so much on self-concept, and Burns write, I quote, self-concept is self-esteem. It is a self-worth, self-acceptance that includes all beliefs and judgments about ourselves. It defines who we are in our own minds, what we can do in our minds, and what we can become in our minds. And I believe that psychology must concentrate to understand the mind. Unfortunately, it hasn't done enough to understand what mind is all about. Well, friends, so what is the nature of self-concept? The self-concept is one's beliefs, as I said, and I repeat, the first nature of self-concept is, in simple words, it is one's belief about oneself, or it is one's belief about believing that he or she can do. Second, it constitutes beliefs that come to mind when you think about yourself. It is also constructed from one's past experience and is integrated with your personality traits, abilities, physical features, values, goals, and social roles. Right? So each self-schema is a schema. What is a schema? When you read about Piaget, you will come to know what is a schema. But okay, for the time being, let me define what is a schema. A schema is an organizational pattern or a conceptual framework. Right? So each self-schema is defined by relatively distinct conceptions and feelings. For instance, you might have considerable information about your social skills and feel quite self-assured about them, but have limited information and less confidence about your physical skills. Right? So beliefs about one's own self not only influence, as I have said, current behavior of a person, but also his or her future behavior. And that's why, you will find that in schools, you can recall very well, some of the students might be bringing their pack bags or bags written, I can. And this is not merely a sentence, this is a belief. Okay? So as far as the self-concept is concerned, friends, now you will be interested to know, okay, so what is the educational implication of self-concept? My first suggestion will be, as far as the educational implication of self-concept is concerned, friends, that it helps children develop socio-personal relationship both inside and outside the classroom, even within the family and outside the family, right? And in the century in which we are living, friends, even I'm interested to write, let's see when I'll be able to write, relationship is the key of human existence. And this coronavirus, the pandemic of corona, has taught us this. We should cherish and value the relationship. Either don't make friendship friends. If you make friendship, do try to make it as powerful so that it can last till you are alive on this earth. Second educational implication, self-concept helps the children in their career development as well. It's not only about socio-personal relationship, no. In your career development, it will help. Last but not the least, it also helps in their academic achievement. Self-concept creates self-motivation in children and students. It fosters self-consciousness in children with the help of good peer groups that, oh, no, it is not right thing, I should not do. Oh, this is a good thing, I must do it. No? So self-consciousness it brings. So friends, with these words, I would like to end this, but at the same time, I'm leaving some questions to you. Do you think the way these great minds, these great psychologists have interpreted the phenomena of learning, that's the only way to learn? Don't you think that the human minds and human beings are different from animals? Do you think it is a right to interpret and apply these theories, classical conditioning or operant conditioning, etc., in a similar fashion as these were applied in the case of animals? I don't know. You ask yourself and you will come to know. So, in the next slides, I'll start with such questions and then I'll give you the another perspective. Thank you so much.